Everyone's doing great, and yes, it is super hot outside. I am Lisa Terry. I am on the Early Intervention Professional Development team, so I will be facilitating today's SC Chats discussion. Dana Childress, she's going to be running the background, and then she's also my backup, so if for some reason my internet goes out or anything wonky happens, she will go ahead and jump right in. But for those of you that this is your first SC Chats, welcome. SC Chats is really just an opportunity for all the service coordinators around the state to share resources, to share strategies among each other, to really help each other out and to be a benefit for you. So today's topic is your powerful role in the child outcome summary process. And I can't say that enough because I am a firm believer that the service coordinator plays such a vital role in the costs process. So this can be a super intimidating step for any newer service coordinators. I still remember when I first started as a service coordinator years ago, it probably took me a good 6 months just to memorize the 3 global outcomes. I had to keep repeating it to myself and saying it over and over again until I truly felt confident even talking to parents about it and discussing it. And so if you are in that boat, that is okay. That is completely normal. If you have all of the years of experience and you're feeling confident now doing it, we really just invite you to share your expertise today. If any of you have any kind of tools or resources, please feel free to share them throughout, and we just encourage you to share those ideas. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today are the tools for success, preparing families, the assessment process, and family engagement. And that may sound a little familiar to you because if you are familiar with the Child Outcomes booklet, that's really what we're going to use as the main tool today. And the reason for that is because the Child Outcomes booklet, it truly does give such a good solid layout for service coordinators and what your job is throughout the process. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to use your raise your hand feature and raise your hand if you have read this book already. So in order to access that, you want to go to the participant box, and so you can hover at the bottom, hit participants, you'll see your name, and then you'll see a raise your hand option. So go ahead and do that, just so I can get a good idea of who's read it. And if you can't find the raise your hand, you can feel free to type in the chat box too. Okay, great. So it looks like some of you have read it and maybe some of you have not read it. It looks about half and half. So we're going to really talk about that today and go over that. And Dana, can I ask you just to clear the hands? If you can do that, please. And also, if you don't mind just dropping the link in for the outcomes booklet in the chat box. Okay, so the Child Outcomes booklet, it really discusses, oh, I'm sorry, I meant to hide my video so I don't use all my bandwidth up too, and you guys can see everything. Okay. Okay, so this really discusses the process that's occurring at the initial, the annual, and the exit. So the book outlines specific tips that discusses how we are preparing families, the assessment process, and team collaboration and family engagement in determining those outcome ratings booklets. Outcome ratings. Thank you, Dana. I see that she dropped the link for the outcomes booklet, so feel free to go ahead and pull that up if you want while we talk about it. So what we want to do today is we also really want to focus on what this looks like for you in your locality. And it's really important to note that when we are talking about preparing families and that team collaboration and family engagement piece, both of those really contribute to the success at the assessment process for initials and annuals and exits. So we're going to talk about preparing families. What I'd like for you to do now is think about prior to the assessment. How do you prepare families to participate in the child outcome summary discussion? And I want you to go ahead and take some time and type that into chat. So this is really going to be personalized to your locality, but go ahead and type in what you do. This might be at the initial phone call, or this also could be done at the intake. And I'm going to give you guys some time to go ahead and write that. Okay, let's see. Dee says, discuss at the intake, then allow parents time to call back with questions. Due to COVID, we are also mailing out the decision tree due to families as well. So that's a great step. And I wonder too, I know some people have mailed out the decision tree prior to COVID. So if that's something that you might continue to do or not. But that's great. Let's see. Send the parents the decision tree prior to initial visit and discuss when explaining the assessment what it will look like. Yep. I will walk through the 3 areas and discuss the flow chart with the questions that we'll answer as a team. I share the screen so they can all see the info. Yeah, I love that. And I love the option with telehealth to actually share the screen. I feel like it just puts everybody on the same platform. We're all on the same page as we're talking about it. That's one of my favorite things about telehealth. Although I'm not part of this process, I know that this is the time that families are given information about how the assessment will go and what is needed for participation. Yes, and that's so important to explain that to the families and what their role is. At intake, I will share how important it is for the family to keep us in the discussion, and we'll show them what the decision tree looks like and give an overview of the outcomes area to help them familiarize themselves with it. Yes, and I think that sometimes it's hard for us because we want to give them so much information, but then it's a lot of information that we also know we're giving them. But I always like to think of it like we're planting seeds. So we're sharing the information, so when we keep revisiting the information, they'll understand it by the time we get to that process. And Sherry says, our intake coordinator provides the family with the decision tree and the age expected indicators ahead of time. Yeah, that's great. And I think that's really important. It seems like a lot of people are sharing that information, sharing some of those tools for success prior to the assessment. Another thing that I used to always share is a blank copy of the IFSP too, just to kind of help familiarize them with that document. So those are great, great tips. If you guys have any other tips as we continue on, please continue to share them, because that might be something that other people might want to put into practice. And let's see, at the intake, sharing the outcome process. Yeah. Okay. So next, what we're going to do is we are going to look at an example of an intake. And what I want you to do as we talk through this is I want you to keep in mind what the service coordinator, whose name is Christopher, what he did well and what he could do differently. So feel free to jot down any kind of notes as we discuss this intake appointment, and we'll talk about it and debrief after. So Amaya was Julia's first child. They were unsure what to expect when the service coordinator called to schedule a visit. She wondered, is Amaya's delay my fault? What is going to happen next? Will early intervention help my child? Why do they need to know so much information? Should Amaya's dad be here for this visit? So these are all very realistic questions that families may wonder to themselves. So Christopher, the service coordinator, He entered the home and sat down. He tried to make a joke to make the family feel more comfortable. Christopher went straight into completing the city and the state paperwork. He explained each document carefully. He completed the ages and stages with the family and showed Julia Amaya's areas of concerns that were found on the ages and stages. Julia still did not know what that meant. Before Christopher left, Amaya became fussy, and Julia told him that she was hungry. He asked Julia if it was okay if he observed her eating. So Julia felt like Christopher was kind of just sitting there watching and judging her. She was still so unsure what to expect and how all of this information will help. So this scenario, as you can see, it kind of gives you a little bit of insight on how the parent's perspective might be too. So let's talk first. So go ahead and type into the chat, what did Christopher do well at the intake appointment? Yeah, he shared the documents. He covered those thoroughly with family and explained them. He tried to make the family feel comfortable. Yeah, so when he first entered, he tried to make them feel a little bit more comfortable to build that rapport. He thoroughly explained the forms to the parent and asked permission to observe the child being fed. Yeah, so he did ask permission, which is great. He observed the child participating in a natural routine. Yes, because those observations are very important and it gives us a lot of information. He did complete the paperwork and share this information with mom, but it seems that he wasn't clear on why he was doing the ages and stages and what the results meant. Yes. So that was still a little bit unclear to mom and she wasn't sure about that. And I think that probably happens a lot, especially with families that come in just thinking that they might have just concerns with their child's language. And then we complete the ages and stages and it might show some other areas of concern. So that can be really confusing for families. So let's look at what could Christopher do differently. So if you were the service coordinator, you were Christopher, what would you do differently in this situation? And go ahead and type that into chat. What would you do differently? Yeah, was the opening joke appropriate for the family? Or did that start the interaction off not on the right foot? Yeah, that's a good question. I have definitely seen some times when people try to build a rapport and it doesn't always seem like it is appropriate and it kind of rubs the family the wrong way. So that's a really important note. Start by asking what they know about early intervention. Yes, yes, I love that. Find out what they know. What did the doctor or the pediatrician, whoever they learned about early intervention from, tell them. Provide mom with positive feedback. Yeah, let mom know she's doing a great job. I love that. I like that he aligned her concerns with the screening tool that he used. I would discuss the areas of concern that were shown on the ages and stages and how they might intersect or how they are different, but explanation is needed, yes. Especially because sometimes families don't even know what fine motor means, right? That's on the ages and stages. I like to start off by asking the family what their concerns or questions are so that we can start focusing on what's most important to them. Yes, and that is such a great tip, especially when we're talking about building a rapport, when you are focused on what's meaningful to them first. That's a great tip. I would have explained what would be completed during the visit and why we would do them. I would be sure to ask the family what questions they have before I start going through the screening or the forms. Yes, Jessica, that's another great and important part of it because it's really important to help ensure that the parents understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, why does all of this information matter. Ask, what does the family know about early intervention? Yes, and my role as a service coordinator. I love that. Yeah, explaining your role too as a service coordinator. This is what I'm here to do. I feel like that's a huge part of building that rapport throughout early intervention as setting the stage for service coordination. It would be helpful to explain why the Ages and Sages is useful, why we look at areas of development. Also, he should explain why he wanted to observe and follow up by asking if feeding is an area of concern. Yeah, I think those are all great ideas because we really want to give the family as much information as we can. Begin with no papers in front of him. I love that. Yes, no papers in front of you because papers kind of are intimidating sometimes to some families, right? And model the start of the visit as a conversation. It also helps to explain why the ASQ looks at all areas of development rather than just the area of concern. Also, talking about the strengths is just as important as discussing the areas of concern. Yeah, so talking about what are Amaya's strengths? What is Julia doing that's so great too, right? Somebody else said that. I like that. Explain my role as a service coordinator. Yes, try to ensure that the family is clear that you're an advocate for their child. Praise mom for her willingness to pursue resources to help with her child's development. Yeah, I think that's a great tip too to building rapport is praising mom. Like I'm so happy that you're here and you're trying to help support your child and we want to team with you to do that. So explaining what they're doing, how they're doing, yes, but also to inform and pause and offer to explain things in a different way. I like to come in, build a rapport to ease a concern about having someone in their home. I like to read my family before I begin so I know where to start. Yeah, and I think that's, to me, that's a part of assessment too, is assessing where the family is and how to build that rapport with them and reading their nonverbal cues. I always make sure that families know that their participation is voluntary so they don't feel trapped into something they don't want to do. Yeah, I think that's a really important thing too, especially talking about those procedural safeguards. Asking family how we can help, what is important to them. Yeah, you guys nailed it. Yeah, these are all fantastic ways to build rapport, to make sure that the family knows that you are on their side and to really support them. Angie said I always start with going through the 2 booklets so they know that everything I explain about the program will be in these booklets if they need to remember to share things with other parents. Yes, and it's always good sometimes too to practice going through those booklets as you're talking about it because it's a lot of information at once, and so you have to kind of be confident in your speech that you're giving to families. Being open to how the family reacts and what their individual needs may be. Yes, I love how you said individual needs too, because I feel like every family is so different, and you kind of have to look at each family as their own unique family and how you can best support them. Okay, so let's see. Let's go to the next slide, and we are going to Oh, Jean said, let families know we view them as experts on their child and family and routines and values. Yeah, and that's really important to explain why all of that information is so important, how that helps us. I know I always like to talk about learning opportunities with families and why that's important for brain development and supporting their child and how early intervention can help support them during those. Okay, so in the child outcomes booklet, there are some tips that are provided. Dana has just dropped the link in. Thank you, Dana, for doing that. So there are 5 tips that we're going to look at. So the first one is explaining to the family that caregivers are important. And you guys got that. That was definitely a trend in the chat box. You know that families are the most important. They know so much information. And so if you look at page 9 in the outcomes booklet, it says it's important for the service coordinator to explain to the family that parents and caregivers are the most important members of the team since they know their child best. In fact, doing so helps families understand how invested service coordinators and early intervention providers are in learning about and understanding their child and family. And I think that's such a valuable statement because we are invested in the family and we don't want to just ask a bunch of questions that have no meaning or value to them. We want to know and understand the best way to support that family. And so explaining that to them and explaining your role in helping to support them is so important. The next thing is observing the child doing something that he enjoys. So Christopher, he tried to do that, right? He tried to observe and see Amaya eating. It was just a little bit awkward because he just kind of observed and he didn't say why he was doing that observation or what meaning it had for him. And so that's the other part, is just making sure we're explaining that to the family. The next thing is sharing a parent's guide to the child outcome summary process handout. So that is the the back page of the decision tree, and that explains the 3 global outcomes, and it really talks about the process, and that's something that's recommended that we do go over with all of the families. And then the 4th thing is reflecting on observations using the child outcome guiding questions checklist. So I don't know if you guys know what that is, but that's on chapter 7 and on page 19. I'm going to go and show you what it looks like. You probably all recognize this now. But this is definitely something that you can use. It's something that can help look at functional development in the 3 outcome areas. I'm not sure if you guys are using this or if you have something else that you're using. This form, it's not required, but it is strongly recommended as a way to kind of help capture some of that functional information while we're preparing for eligibility determination and the assessment for service planning. Oh, and thank you, Dana, for dropping the decision tree there in the chat box. So if you guys have other forms or if you have other tools that you're using, feel free to send them to me. You can also email them to me and we can help share them. One thing that you can also do is look at our VEIPD site. Under topics, there is, oh, thanks to Dana, she's on it. There's my email. But if you look at our VEIPD site, we do have a topics and there's an assessment tab that will also give you other resources too. Okay, so the last tip is preparation through explanation. So in order to help family members fully participate, so fully participate is really important because we want them to not just be bystanders. We want them to actively engage and participate, give us information, give us their opinions and their thoughts throughout the actual assessment process and the ratings discussions. So it's really important that we give them that background information before the assessment for service planning. So the service coordinator on the team should be explaining the 3 outcome areas, the purpose of the child outcome summary process, and the decision tree. And then it should also include letting the family know what to expect during the meeting and provide an opportunity for questions. And we want to stress how important it is for families to contribute information on what they've seen their child do. Because the more information that they give us, the easier it is too as we're going through the decision tree. So let's look at the assessment process next. Oh, thank you, Dana. She just dropped in the link for the VEIPD assessment page. Okay, so in addition to the use of an assessment tool as an age anchor, additional information is gathered from multiple sources, right? So we can use observation, the family, the caregivers, our informed clinical opinion, and any other resources. We might use resources received from childcare, medical records, or any other resources that are individualized to that family. And the more individualized, rich, and functional information that we collect, then the easier it is for us to determine the child outcome statement during the decision tree. I think one of the hardest things that I have seen before is when we get to the decision tree and it's asking us to look across all settings and situations, and we don't always have all of that information that's required for us to make that determination. And so it's really important to look at that individualized information. So looking at the decision tree. So what I want to do right now is use our stamp tool. And I want to find out how often are you using the decision tree. So are you using it 0%, not at all? Maybe sometimes you're using it 25%. 50% is half the time you're using it, 75% is 3/4, and then 100% all the time you're using it. And so remember, to access the stamp tool, you go to View, Options, and Annotate, and then you can choose that stamp tool. So drop a stamp. If you are having issues with your stamp tool, then feel free to go ahead and type it into the chat box. %, so far. Looks like most people, 75%. 75, 75, 100, 100. So it looks like most everyone's using it almost always or all the time. And it is a requirement that everyone uses the decision tree during the child outcome summary process. And so I just highly encourage you to continue to feel comfortable using it. There is also a Talks on Tuesday that talks about the decision tree. There's a part 1 and part 2 from December 2018 and November 2018 that you can always look up, that's archived too, to help you feel more comfortable using it. Okay, let's see. Thank you. And I am going to just clear the screen really quick. Okay, and just to note, when you are finished with your stamp tool, you just want to make sure you hit that X on there, and so that way when we move forward to other slides, it will not accidentally stamp on the screen. But if you do, don't worry, and either myself or Dana will clear it. Okay, so now let's talk about your role as a service coordinator, and think about when you are participating in the child outcome summary process, what does your role look like? So what are you doing during the child outcome summary process? How are you contributing? So go ahead and type that into chat, because I know that this may look different across different localities. So let's talk about it and see what you guys are doing. So Jessica said, guiding the parents, giving input when needed or requested. Yes. And you have a lot of input, especially if you were there at the intake appointment. I feel like that is really important information that you're contributing to at the assessment. Same with us, okay. I read the description of the areas and prepare the family for what we will be discussing, as well as inform them. We will review the decision tree after and encourage them to give input when needed. So it sounds like you're really explaining it to them and then guiding them along, so facilitating that discussion. Yeah, Heather says same. Jean says, I want to be sure that the family understands the process as the team reviews it. Yeah, and I think that's a really important step, is making sure that you're checking for understanding from the family. Adding any thoughts to the discussion of examples to thinking about all the settings sometimes. Yeah, I feel like that is one of my favorite things when I am not the service coordinator on the team and I'm the provider. I love it when service coordinators kind of cue me, especially if I forget something, because I feel like we all forget things sometimes and forget to discuss a certain situation or setting with the family. So that's great. Guiding parents, asking about skills shown during daily routines. Yeah, so getting a little bit more information from them. Kim said she's facilitating the discussion, the conversation, and asking questions to ensure that the skills are looked at across all settings and situations. Yeah. And I feel like sometimes service coordinators have such a great perspective because you can help ensure that you are getting everything covered. So it sounds like you're explaining steps of the process to the families. One other thing you could do is asking for the input from other team members. Sometimes I know during like assessments when I was a service coordinator, it would seem like there would be other providers, like or one provider that was a little bit more quiet. And so I would try to get a little bit more, elicit a little bit more information from them too, to make sure everybody was contributing equally to the conversation, or eliciting from the parent too, and contributing your own examples, yes. Also sharing the screen during the discussion and moving the flow chart form as we move forward with the discussion. Yeah, I love sharing the screen, and I love making sure that everybody has a copy of the decision tree, and so we're all talking about the same thing. Making sure everyone's on the same page, yes. Trying to make sure everyone feels comfortable and staying on track, yes. So making sure that everything's smooth. There's a smooth conversation flow from the beginning to the end, and that's a really important role for a service coordinator. So let's take a look. And if you guys have any other things, feel free to keep typing. We're going to take a look at supporting the child outcome summary process kind of in steps, and we're going to look at how Christopher could contribute throughout the child outcome summary process using, I'm going to clear this, sorry. If you guys want to just make sure that you are X'd out of your annotation, and I will clear it. Okay. All right. Can you see my little spotlight? Someone just tell me if you see a little red dot. Yes, okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna start here. So first, Christopher could explain the caregiver's role as a team member. So he could explain how the parent could participate before starting. So he could also prompt Julia, right? He could prompt her to pause, to reflect, and to provide any kind of feedback that's helpful to make decisions. And then we're going to keep moving to the second one. This is where Christopher could explain each outcome area and the use of the decision tree. And you guys all hit the first two. So you both, everyone has said that. So you want to make sure that Christopher, he could have shared a copy of the decision tree with the family, right, and explained the other side of the child outcomes. He can make sure that each team member has a copy. So always carrying around extra copies with him. If this is happening via telehealth, then sharing the screen to make sure that everyone can see it as you're discussing it. So that's another little tip. Let's keep going. We're going to move down to 3. So this is where we're going to discuss each outcome area. And I feel like this is probably one of the very important ones. I know that sometimes this is where we get into some of that narrative writing and talking about what goes into each area. But we really just want to make sure that it's individualized and that we're adding a lot of examples across different situations, settings, and looking at the strengths as well as the areas of growth. Sometimes we also want to make sure that it's very balanced. So you don't always want to have a discussion that's super strength-based or without any of those areas of growth, or vice versa. So the areas of growth, those are really important in justifying the child outcome statement that's chosen. So as a service coordinator, that's where you can use the cues indicated for each outcome area. So on the IFSP, for example, if you look at the social emotional skills, including social relationships, there's a little sentence in italics that says, this area involves how your child interacts with adults and other children, including how your child communicates his or her feelings. So you can use that to make sure that you're kind of going through it. Again, I showed you on page 19 in the Child Outcomes book. That's another great way to kind of cue you to make sure that you're covering everything as well. And so Christopher can make sure that each component is reviewed in detail with the family. And then if there's any other need or anything missing, kind of prompt the team for that more discussion when needed. So like for example, I always found that when I was in assessments, it would be the use of behaviors to get needs met, that section, because there's so much that's covered in there with dressing and feeding and sleeping, that there was always like something that was left out, like maybe like sleeping. And so I would kind of prompt the team. So let's talk a little bit more about sleeping. So what does that look like? And then I would get that information in there. So just making sure that all of the information is covered. Okay, so let's go to 4. So reviewing typical functional child development. And this is something that I have personally always found really helpful, especially when you're looking at everyone as a team and making sure everyone's on the same page. But Christopher could, or another team member, just reviewing typical development information with the family and the whole team, just to help ensure that everyone understands what's age expected before you go through the decision tree. And so I've just found that it helps the parents participate a little bit more, because it's kind of laid down the expectations for them, and then they can answer the questions with a little bit more meaning to them. And then we're going to go to 5, and this is using the decision tree, discussing each question and prompt. So this is where Christopher can really help prompt team members to thoughtfully discuss each question and contribute examples, especially on the decision tree where it says, let's talk about some examples. So really thinking about those examples across all settings and situations too. And then finally, decide as a team the best statement. So this is where Christopher is really going to help facilitate this discussion and making sure that every team member is included, and that's including the parent, to continue along the decision tree. And all of these steps combined, so if you look at all of them, all of these steps will really help to engage families and participate in determining the best statement. For usually when I kind of go through all of these steps, by the time we get to the decision tree, the families are picking their statement on their own independently. So I've just found it to be really successful. Okay, so let's look at what did Christopher do. So just to give you what's coming up, so we are going to continue our journey with Amaya, Julia, and Christopher at the assessment for service planning. And so again, while you listen to this scenario, I really want you to think and jot down notes if you want to on what went well and what could Christopher have done better, but also how would you prevent this situation in the future? And this is a scenario that I'm sure happens pretty frequently, or everyone's seen at some point throughout their career. So let's go to the scenario. Okay. So Christopher, the service coordinator, Martina, the occupational therapist, and Christy, the developmental service provider, discuss Amaya's development and positive social emotional skills with Julia, Amaya's mother. Throughout the process, Christopher facilitated by explaining what the team was going to do and what each child outcome area meant. Christopher pauses and reflects with Julia to gain more information at each step and to check for understanding. When the team discusses the decision tree, they realize they do not have enough information across all settings and situations. So they continue to ask Julia some questions about how Amaya interacts with others in the community. In the meantime, Amaya is starting to get overwhelmed. She cries and Julia begins to soothe her. The service coordinator, occupational therapist, and developmental service provider continue on in a hurry to finish so they can leave, since Amaya seems to have had enough. They finish the child outcome summary, develop goals, and finalize the IFSP. Julia was left with unanswered questions, hurt about her child's delays, unsure how to help Amaya, and confused on what just happened towards the end of the meeting. So let's talk about this scenario. So first, let's talk about, what did Christopher do well? So go ahead and type into chat, what did he do well? Yeah, he paused, he checked in. Yep, paused to check for understanding, so he was very mindful. He talked about who would do what during the meeting, explained the indicator areas. So he's giving explanation. He explained each step, so made sure everyone was included. So they started off really great, right? He seemed to do a good job of listening, taking the time to understand what Julia was saying and facilitating. And that probably really empowered Julia, and Julia felt heard. She probably felt like that team really understood the whole picture with Amaya and what was going on and heard her and validated her concerns. Okay, so let's go to what could Christopher have done better? So what do you think Christopher could have done better? Go ahead and type that into chat. Been more patient with the family? Yes. And I think sometimes that's hard when you are there with other providers who might be less patient, and then you have to be the one to kind of help facilitate that. Offer to finish up another time, possibly on a conference call, or give mom time to tend to her daughter's needs. Yeah, so offer that. I think sometimes when we're going into a house, families feel like they have to be the host to us. And so if we're all sitting down with the family and talking to them, they might feel kind of rude just leaving. And so we have to just let them know, like, it's okay if you have to get something for Amaya or take care of her really quick. Ask the family how they felt the best way to move forward since Amaya needed a break. Yeah, because that's going to happen, right? I always stop and let the parents know that we can always pause whenever there's a situation where they need to tend to the child. Yeah. And I feel like it's probably a really common situation where at some point the child's needs have to get met. And so that could be even something that we start to prepare families for ahead of time at the intake too. When Amaya starts to get really fussy, it may have been best to schedule a second meeting to finalize the IFSP. If that wasn't possible, it might be helpful to give mom a little time to calm the baby. Yeah, so just giving them options, like letting them know this is completely okay. Like these are your options. If you want to reschedule or if you want to take a break to take care of her, and then we can reconvene. Explain that her daughter's needs come first. We can complete at a later date. Yeah, I like how you said it too, that her daughter's needs come first. Like Amaya's a priority. Trying to slow down at the end of assessment can be difficult or impossible depending on provider schedules. Yes, that's true. Making sure that mom knows she can call afterward with any question or concerns is a good strategy. Even offering to call her and debrief later that day when things are less chaotic for mom and the service coordinator. Yeah, I think that's like, let's talk about that just for a second, just because slowing down at the end of assessment, like I always feel like once we get to the reporting out at the first outcome and then into the goals, like that's where it starts. It may get a little chaotic because we've been there for a while. And provider scheduling, that may influence it because they may have to go to another appointment afterwards. So what do you do as a service coordinator? What could you do in that situation when that happens? Because we definitely don't want to make the families feel like they're not important, or we don't want to give them enough time. So what could you do? What else could you do? I'll wait a few more seconds, see if some other strategies pop up. I know that the time for assessments is really different across the state on how much time people allot for assessment. Sometimes it's 2 hours, sometimes it's 3 hours. But I think even for like providers, they can schedule an additional 15 minutes too, to just in case it does need to go a little bit longer at the end. So not scheduling a back-to-back visit after an assessment and giving at least a 15-minute time frame. Separate the ASP and the IFSP and set that expectation up from the beginning. Yeah, that is an option. Yep. Okay, so let's look at how could you prevent the situation in the future? So what would you do? And I think that's probably the part where we want to ensure that there's enough time scheduled with the families too. Explain what happens on the ASP date from the very beginning so the family can better choose the time. Oh, I like that. That's a really good idea. So they can choose the time in the day of the ASP schedule too. Yeah, so making sure that the family knows like this is really what's going to happen when we're scheduling, and just to make sure that you have a good idea, this is what you can expect. And so we want to choose a time that's more convenient for you. That's a great idea. Plan around nap time, lunch, etc. And it's always nice too if you know that you're planning around those times and you can break it up a little bit. So you can go and switch rooms to observe. So if you did like around lunchtime too, so maybe you start talking with the family and then you move into a different room. So it gives the child a nice break in scenery, because switching rooms sometimes can help with that. Try to schedule around the child's nap and routines, letting them know that any routine that arises is okay with us and their child needs to take first priority. Yes. I think that happens a lot with feeding and diaper changes, and that's okay. I think one of my favorite things to do afterwards is talking with the team after on ways to improve. So really facilitating that discussion as a service coordinator, you know, like, hey, like, what did you think went really well in there? What do you think that we could do next time to improve? Not necessarily talking about it right after, because you don't want the family to think that you're talking about them in the driveway, but touching base with the team to really keep discussing that, so that way you can only get stronger. I have found that some of the strongest teams that I have seen, that is one of the things that they always do. They meet and they talk about it, and they continue to grow and improve in ways. And also empowering families. Empowering families is really important too, by giving them that information and letting them know. And not always making them feel rushed too. Also, things that happen may lead to some more questions to help with. Yes, yes. Um, I think that's huge too, because when you are looking at observations and you're giving them that time to do that, you can find out a lot more information on what that looks like. Understanding the family more, which help for ongoing help. Yes, absolutely. Um, and some additional like tips is just making sure that the information that you're gathering is accurately reflected in the narrative, that you're helping to guide those providers. The providers are ultimately responsible for that information, but what's going in there and making sure that it's a team effort is really important. One thing that I do is because I am very forgetful. I like to write down notes and kind of jot down things to help trigger my memory. And so I'll write notes to kind of talk about certain examples throughout the 3 outcome areas, and just using your resources that you have. Again, if you go to that VEIPD page under the assessment topic tab, there are some other tools that are available that you can help utilize that. Or you can just take that page 19 out of the child outcomes booklet to kind of help you jot some things down. And one thing that I always really like to do was reflecting back on the discussion done with the intake, at the intake as a service coordinator during the assessment too, because I wanted to make sure that was still meaningful information and if there was any changes, but I also wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page and didn't miss any information. And you could also read back everything. So once everything's typed in, whoever's doing the typing or handwriting in the 3 outcome areas, making sure that you're reflecting back that information to the family in case they have any information that they felt like we missed or they still wanted to share, or if they have any questions. During the intake and the pandemic, families will send us videos and lists of foods and words to help make that ASP more effective. Yes, and videos have always been a fantastic way to get information. I think too, like as a service coordinator, you could elicit some of that by talking to the families at the intake to videotape their child before the ASP too and share those. So I think those are all valuable tips and strategies that you can do. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so family engagement. So if we are preparing families, we're encouraging their full participation of the team, and we're having this natural discussion at the end of each question and the related decision point that's on the decision tree, then families will naturally engage. And so you'll have a lot more success kind of just following all of these tips and strategies and everything that you guys have been talking about today and sharing that information with the families. It's so important. And the service coordinator and the service providers really support that family engagement in this process when you're preparing the families and encouraging their participation and giving that meaning and value to them. And again, I just want to stress to you that you play such a powerful role in the child outcome summary process. To me, a service coordinator can really make or break the process. And so it's really important to know your role, to help facilitate that, and to get familiar with the child outcomes booklet. I can't say that enough, because if those that have not read it yet, it really does a phenomenal job outlining a service coordinator's role and what you do to contribute to that. So check that out. I am going to go ahead and open it up for questions as I go over the last couple slides to give you some information on what's coming up next. So if you have any specific questions, feel free to go ahead and type them into the chat while I continue on. Okay, so stay tuned for the next SC chat. We do not have a final date yet, but stay tuned and we will send that out in a email, and we'll also advertise it on our social media pages. I do want to say, if you are not following us on social media, there are so many different avenues for you to do that. We are on Facebook. If you look at VEIPD, we are on YouTube, it's VEIPD. We are on Twitter at VEIPD, and then we are also on Instagram now, and that is VEIPD_team. So check that out, because we do highlight a lot of resources because we know and we recognize that we have a lot of resources on our websites and all over, and so we will from time to time highlight different resources for you, and we also advertise our SE chats and other things like that. So go ahead and give us a follow. And then the next thing after this web discussion, and Dana's going to go ahead and, there you go, she's going to add the survey link there. If you guys can go ahead and complete that, I'll also email it out. But if you can give us some feedback, and then once you complete the survey, you will actually have access to the certificate of completion. So again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to email me, and there's my email on the screen. You can also, if you have any tools or resources that you feel like are beneficial for the cost process, please, please, please go ahead and send those to us, because we love to share resources that you guys may have. So again, thank you everyone. I appreciate it so much, and for all of your input. And thank you, Dana, for dropping that link in the survey.